This is episode 74 of Cinescope, and live and die on this day. Welcome to Cinescope, where our goal is not to criticize or to assign ratings, but rather to celebrate the movies we love, exploring story, characters, music, and relevance to the world around us. I'm your host, Chad Hopkins, and joining me today is Francisco Ruiz to talk about one of our favorite films, The Grey. How are you doing tonight, Francisco? Francisco?
I'm doing quite well, Chad. How about yourself?
I've been busy, but I'm doing well. It's a nice kind of busy.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
That's better than the bad kind of busy, I suppose.
Right. Well, thank you for being on the show. You're sort of recovering from a cold. We've been trying to do this episode for a couple of weeks now, and just things have been crazy, as we mentioned. And here we are finally.
Wolves keep trying to attack us. Why do we do that?
I don't know. But it's been a long while since you've been on the show. You were last on episode 17 talking about Crimson Tide. So for those of us who are maybe new to the show, haven't listened all the way back then, how about you tell us who you are, what you do, and all that kind of stuff before we get started?
Sure, yeah. I am a podcaster as well. I do a show called the Retro Rewind Podcast with my good friend Paul Powers, where we take a fresh look at movies and video games that are 15 years or older. And we talk about the things we like about them, the things we don't like when we rewatch them, and then talk about those things. And then give a rating of classic, nostalgic, or tragic. Pretty much, should you watch this movie or not, is essentially how that breaks down. But we have a lot of fun doing that. And we've been doing that for about 5 years. So we love movies and games. So thrilled to come in onto Cinescope with you, Chad, and actually talk about a movie that's not so old, more newer, and one that's dear to my heart. So thank you for this opportunity.
Of course. And thank you for introducing me to this movie, as we'll talk about here in a minute. It's always nice as a podcaster. You get in your niche and you're recording stuff for your show. And every once in a while, it's just nice to break away and do something different. So I'm glad you were able to revisit something a little bit newer than 15 years old. And with that, let's just go ahead and get started. So we are talking about The Grey. It was released in the U.S. on January 27th of 2012, was directed by Joe Carnahan, who also directed Blood, Guts, Bullets, and Octane, Narc, The Hire, The Ticker, Smokin' Aces, The A-Team, and Stretch. Lots of weird movie titles in there. It was written by Carnahan and Ian Mackenzie Jeffers and was based on the short story, I believe, Ghostwalker by Ian Mackenzie Jeffers. And the music was by Mark Streitenfeld, who also composed the scores for A Good Year, American Gangster, Body of Lies, Robin Hood, Welcome to the Rileys, Prometheus, After the Fall, Poltergeist, and All I See Is You. And the movie stars Liam Neeson, Frank Grillo, Dermot Mulroney, Dallas Roberts, Joe Anderson, Nonzo Anozie, James Badgedale, Ben Hernandez-Bray, and Anne Openshaw. So, starting off, what was your first experience that you remember with this movie, Francisco?
Well, after seeing the trailers or the trailer of the commercial on TV, I'm like, you know what? I haven't seen a actual survival movie. I think I can't recall one where there's like men trying to survive against a beast of some sort. I know Alec Baldwin and I think Anthony Hopkins did one called The Bear or something like that, where they're trying to survive against a bear. I never saw it. I'm interested in seeing it, but so I don't have like a survival movie like that to call my own. And I've always been fascinated with wolves, so I'm like, this looks like is a movie made for me. So I asked a friend of mine if he'd want to go see it, and he was like, "Yeah, let's go do that." So we went to the theater, we saw it, and I was very moved by it, and it's something that stuck with me after. It was one of those times where we were both dads, so we didn't have time to just come home to go out to coffee after and talk. We had to get home to our kids and our wives and stuff. But it was one of those where I wish there was time to go somewhere and unpack the things we had just seen.
Okay. Well, I remember when this movie came out, but I didn't see it.
Why not?
I don't know. I think this was my second year of college. I was really just sort of getting into the swing of being a big movie fan, and I had just started or was beginning to start my movie review website at the time. And usually, if I went to see a movie, it wasn't to see the typical fare that I expected of a Liam Neeson action movie at that time. Now, this is
skills,
right. I just had a certain expectation or a certain I assumed certain things of Liam Neeson action movies, and so I didn't have interest. I wasn't interested in it. I do remember getting good reviews at the time, I think, but it was just no, thank you.
Yeah.
But since then, I've seen a couple of said Liam Neeson action movies. Saw Nonstop a few years ago, and I liked that. Just recently, as in just yesterday, saw The Commuter, and I liked that as well.
Cool.
And
I have not seen any of those, so that's good to know that there might be worth watching.
Yeah, they are. And quick plug, Cinescope Today, new episode of The Commuter. We just talked about it with Seth last night, and that should be available today as well. But anyways,
go check it out now.
Yeah. So I've warmed up to Liam Neeson and his action movies, and Liam Neeson himself is likable. I mean, the Batman movies, Schindler's List, anything you see him in, it's hard to not like Liam Neeson. So I was reasonably interested in and excited to watch this movie for the first time since you had brought it up as something you were interested in talking about. So I popped it in tonight, or I say popped it in as if I'm talking about a VHS tape. I pulled it up on iTunes on my Apple TV. But I watched it tonight. And Francisco, I did not expect what this movie was. I think back to the marketing for the film, and I was like, okay, it's Liam Neeson versus wolves. And for some reason, I had it in my head that it was Liam Neeson solo versus wolves. And the whole movie was basically what we got in the last 5 minutes. Is sort of how they marketed it. I remember at least. Like that final shot where he's strapping the mini bottles to his hand. That was like the whole marketing, and that it's such false advertising in retrospect.
Yeah, totally.
So
even the poster, I think, is that final shot of him right before. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had no clue that this was like a group survival movie. I just thought it was Liam Neeson on his own, fighting the wild and killing wolves and whatever it was going to be. So spoilers, it's not that. And it really is pretty emotionally affecting. There's some really heavy stuff in here. So just like talking about story in general, maybe not necessarily story, but like the sequences, the plane crash sequence in this movie is devastating.
Oh my gosh. Yes. I'm sure I've seen plane crashes in movies before, and there's something so arresting about how they shot sort of, it's just everything's peaceful. Like you see the bumping at first, like everyone's like awake and oh my gosh, it's so bumpy. And Otway, Liam Neeson's character, is trying to sleep. And then, they're calm, everything's calm. And then you see the stewardess close first class or whatever. I don't know why there's a first class cabin on this type of jet or whatever. But anyway, she does that. And then you see the map, I think, is supposed to sort of display where they are so that you have context for where they're about to crash. But then it fuzzes, and then it's all of a sudden a lot of bumping and craziness happening. And just, how you see pretty much what you don't see is almost as important as what you do see, and adds to the tension, I feel, because you don't see like what's going on really with the plane. You just see it like explode, people like getting thrown back in their seats, and Otway being super smart and buckling himself down in 2 seats, and then you just see it spinning, and you see the cabin. I mean, go see this movie because it is amazing, at least from what I remember and seeing it again. It's jaw-dropping to me. You just see it spinning, and the land is below him. And I can for whatever reason, the way they shot this, put myself in that seat and thinking, how in the world does anyone survive anything like this when a plane is going down? So
And there are a lot of sequences in this movie that sort of harken to that level of realism. There's the crash
Yes.
site itself afterwards, and the wreckage, and the dead bodies, and the gore,
Mm-hmm.
and then the wolf attacks. I mean, all of this is gruesome, but it's not like it's overly gratuitous
Yeah.
or excessive or revelatory in its violence. It's just saddeningly, unfortunately realistic, and
Totally. Yeah.
that's what really sort of like takes your heart with a grip of ice and just like, oh, that hurts. And
Yeah.
it's insane the level of realism brought to those sequences in particular in this film. I think
Mm-hmm.
previously the main flight crash sequence that comes to mind is in Flight, directed by Robert Zemeckis with Denzel Washington. At the
Oh.
start of the film,
Mm-hmm.
there's a crash sequence or
Mm-hmm.
semi crash sequence, and that was really tense. And this is just
Yeah.
like next level beyond that. It's insane.
And sort of touching off something you just brought up, the sort of realism aspect and the hardship that these characters go through. And I think, I don't think these are my words. I think I saw a documentary or something on this, and I think either Liam Neeson or the director said something to the effect of, in a lot of movies you see people get killed, but you don't often see people die. And this and only one other movie are the only movies that I ever recall actually seeing people die, and that really impacted me in a way that, yeah, most like Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. I love you, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'll have lunch with you any day. But but your movies, for the most part, are like, yeah, kill just droves of people. It doesn't matter. They're just collateral damage, which I think is one of your movies. But yeah, this movie, oh my gosh, every death is just so you that you can see them dying. And that these characters, and we'll talk about these, I'm sure, in a bit here, but the characters are so developed that just makes their deaths even more impactful. So how this story uses death to punctuate its not milestones, but its acts is very, very well done.
And at the same time, all of this gruesome content and all of these deaths are semi-balanced with moments of levity, like when they find success in their survival, when they kill the wolf,
Yes.
when they're reveling in their victory. It's essential in sort of bringing up those low points just a little bit, so you have some room to breathe, and so you're not just trudging through the mud the entire time. And that scene
Totally.
where they're cooking and eating the wolf in particular is especially fun, just because it's their first real victory aside from surviving this plane crash, and they're really sort of sticking it to the wolves in their minds, and I think that's
Yeah.
really cool, and it's a fun scene.
Did you feel like scenes like that or seeing successes? How did you feel like this movie was leading you in terms of, did you think everyone was gonna, like, more people were going to make it out? Or I mean, even by the end we don't know really if anyone made it out. But do you feel like you were always guessing at that? I certainly felt like I was. I could not tell what was going to happen. I kept hoping, oh, well, hopefully you'll make it. Oh no, you left. Okay, well maybe the rest of you. Oh, okay. How about you two?
Yeah, in a way, it's got a lot of similarities to Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, where you're just knocking out the
Yeah.
kids one by one. Not that these guys are necessarily being naughty, but there is that parallel where we're just getting rid of one at a time. I don't know. I don't know if I was expecting a certain outcome. I think by the end of it, in retrospect, it all made sense that it was heading sort of to a dead end.
Yeah.
And this is such a cliche statement, but it's so true. It wasn't about the destination. It's not about where they end up. It's about the journey to get there and the personal growth they go on throughout.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, just a couple smaller things story wise. I love the subtle things like the flashbacks with his wife, and
Yes.
even at the very beginning, before we get any story content whatsoever, I think he's still doing the voiceover with his letter. He picks up the picture frame of his wife, and it's covered in dust, and he has to like wipe it away. And so just the fact that this thing is covered in dust means that there's been some sort of passage of time, that he's been alone for a while and he's been dealing with this struggle for a while. And so just little subtle filmmaking, things like that. It's really masterful storytelling when you don't have to tell us. Show, don't tell is a popular aphorism, and he does it really well here.
Yeah, and just one other thing I want to add to that is just the opening title. And I never noticed this before, but this time I totally keyed in on it, that you see the is dead center in the frame. And then gray comes in from the side, and it honestly made me think of the Velociraptor coming in from the side in Jurassic Park. But I think it was to evoke the idea that you don't see the blizzards coming, you don't see the wolves coming, but they're coming for you, and so you're not gonna see what's gonna happen, but you're not gonna know what to expect because it's gonna come at you from the side.
Right. Now, just talking about the characters more specifically, we do have Liam Neeson at the forefront, of course. John Otway, as we learn his name is. He's known as just Otway for the majority of the film. And all we know at the start is that he's been through some sort of trauma in his past regarding his wife, and it sort of left him joyless. We first see him, he's in this crowded bar, people everywhere, having a good time, some fights going on. It's a lively community. But here he is, sitting at the bar by himself, doing shot after shot after shot, which tells me that these shots aren't for fun, for loosening up. This is to dull pain.
Yeah.
And it's painful. He's ready to say goodbye by suicide, as we find out shortly. And something stops him, the howl of a wolf, maybe. But it's sad seeing the sort of rock bottom space this character starts off on, and then it leaves you questioning, well, what walked him away from that? What took him back from the ledge? So yeah, it's a fascinating introduction to Otway as a character.
Yeah, and I mean, he's the one we follow throughout the whole thing, so I definitely am rooting for him the whole time. And it was especially fascinating to me that you have a parallel of him and John, Frank Grillo's character, Diaz, I believe.
Yeah,
Diaz. They're both named John, and yet John Diaz starts off the movie like very like bravado and like, I can tough out through anything, I got this, no worries. But as the movie progresses, they almost trade places, where at the end Diaz is just, I'm done, I'm gonna sit right here, enjoy this shot of nature, and let the wolves come for me. Whereas John Otway has decided, you know what, it's every moment is worth fighting for. I forget the exact quote, but he says something like, those moments in your life, like thinking of your daughter or what, those are the moments that make you want to live for the next moment, make you fight harder for it. And I think him vocalizing that, and him, well, I think I'm getting a bit into the theme here, but I do want to say that I like his progression as well. And I like that it sort of crosses with Diaz's progression.
It's sort of interesting that we see Otway starting off in this rock bottom place, but then when the crash happens or begins to happen, his basic instinct is survival right off the bat. As you mentioned, he doesn't bother with panicking or with worrying what to do. He straps himself down, he grabs an oxygen mask, he rides it out, and then when he comes to, he does what he can to help the survivors, to build a fire, to find food. It's in stark contrast to the man who nearly killed himself before. And so I was sort of left wondering, a lot of my notes when I watch a movie for the first time for Cinescope is sort of stream of thought. So I was wondering, is this a desire to protect, like he couldn't protect his wife? Because at this point, we didn't know what had happened to his wife. And so I was just, what could have happened? Is it connected to the wolves? Is that why the howl of a wolf stopped his suicide? I don't know. But in his letter at the beginning, he said something like, he stopped doing this world any real good. So I wonder if he saw this as his opportunity to change that. And it was his way of making up for the fact that maybe he wasn't doing good in the world, but here he can make a difference in the lives of these 6 to 7 other men.
Exactly. I think that's the key, is that he finally found just even, I mean, even at his normal job of protecting these oil drillers or whoever they are from the wolves, that does give him some sense of purpose. But I feel like that's him taking life. That's what I almost feel like that's what he's more focused on, is that he had to kill these wolves, as opposed to now in this situation, he has to protect lives. And he's protecting he's trying to save lives, not so much by killing wolves, just by like making sure you got, like you said, the food, shelter, fire, all that. And I think that definitely, that drive definitely gives him a sense of purpose and something to live for. One thing I want to mention about his wife, I honestly thought at least maybe it was just a trick, but I thought the way he phrased it, I assumed she had left him and he was just remembering a nice time on the bed with her before she had left him. And I never really got that. I mean, and at the end, of course, I got, oh, she died. That's what he meant. But so I didn't have this connection. Oh, maybe the wolves got her or something like that. That's interesting, though, that your mind went there. I could definitely see why that would be another reason to spur him on.
I just assumed that she was dead, and it comes to find out it was through cancer or through some other sort of terminal illness we get in that final sequence at the end. So in any case, he couldn't save her the way he wanted to. And so I do think that there is some worth in saying that maybe that's what he was trying to do here, was save a life when he couldn't before.
Totally.
And it's just fascinating watching his character, because he takes everything in stride. What comes next to him is something he views as an inevitability of their situation. So they better be prepared for it. So they start forging weapons, and they start forging ahead towards an eventual destination. They rather than stagnate in a single location and be hunted. So it's cool to see this character just all of a sudden take charge, lead the way, and say, this is what's going to happen to us if we don't do this. This is what might happen to us if we do this. So let's do this. And of course, Diaz doesn't take well to that at first, but it's nice that one of them takes charge.
Yeah, totally. And I also found it really cool that as Otway is finding a reason to live, that almost in a way inspires the others to find a reason to live, because as he had said before in his voiceover, that this was like just a den of thieves he is in, pretty much just people at the edge of the world, that just drunkards and just whatever, people that didn't mean much to many people. And here, when they're all fighting for their lives, he's finding a reason to live, and I can see that almost coming out of them too, because I think they totally get on board with collecting the wallets, and Heinrich wants to say a prayer before they leave, which is like, if these are people that are just care solely about themselves, they're not gonna. I mean, Diaz is kind of that way to start, but I think that's more of him wanting to come off as just macho than I think he probably does really care. But I think that's cool that Otway's drive inspired the other men to sort of wake up from this, like, I'm going to go work, then I'm going to drink and fall asleep. I'm going to go work, drink, fall asleep. Now they're actually, we have to fight to live. Okay, I actually want to make these. If these are my last days on Earth, I want to make them count for something, whether it's mourning my brothers or if it's just helping them survive or what have you.
I'm glad you mentioned the wallets, because what that showed to me was that Otway has experience with death because he has respect for the dead. Probably from that experience with his wife. He doesn't allow Diaz to loot the bodies for swag, as he calls it, because it's disrespectful. And then right after the crash happens and he makes his way back to the plane and the wreckage, there's Lewandin, he's dying. There's nothing they can do.
Oh my gosh.
And that scene is the first like real heart-wrenching scene of the film, where he says, what's happening is you're dying and it's okay. Take peace in that. Think of somebody you love and let that person you love help you slip into this warmth that is going to take you home.
Yeah.
And that's powerful. And I love that he doesn't try and sugarcoat it. It's just, this is an inevitability. This is what is happening to you, and you're going to leave more peacefully if you just accept that and find peace in that.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's almost why most of the other men find Otway so compelling as a leader, because he doesn't flinch in the face of death. He's right there holding Lewin, and pronouncing that wrong, his hand while he's dying, being there throughout the whole thing. I think that's highly compelling as someone you want to in terms of someone you want to follow in a situation like that. You don't want them like chickening out on you or scared of blood or something like that. You need someone who's like solid.
Right. The wallet scene at the end of the film really drove home another point that I think this movie was making, and this is theme territory as well, but that's okay. These are men who've worked together. They all know each other before they get on the flight, and so they're all on a name basis, but it's a last name basis. They are coworkers and nothing more. And so in that final moment, as he's preparing to face down the wolves and he's looking through these wallets, he's also looking through their photos that are in the wallets. And so he's remembering the dead through their own memories.
Yeah.
And as Diaz was parting, he introduces himself. My name is John, and Henrik's name is Pete, and Otway's name is also John. And so it's a commentary, I think, on how we have these people around us who we might only see as coworkers, but there are more meaningful relationships there to pursue. And it doesn't have to take a life or death situation in order to pursue those relationships. These people have names, these people have families, and they didn't find that out about each other until they were all on the chopping block, to put it in one way. So I think that's something to sort of take away from the film as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that I couldn't have said it better than myself, so I'm not going to.
The other main character we've talked about him a little bit is Diaz. There are two main characters, I think. We've got other characters by name, but the ones that go on the most growth are Otway and Diaz. And as you mentioned earlier, Diaz is sort of just trying to act macho. He's trying to deny fear. He's questioning Otway as a way to appear macho. He says, "Who put you in charge? Why should we listen to you? What you're doing is getting some of us killed," so on. Well, I think that more of them...
it kind of was, but...
Well, that's true. As we unfortunately find out at the end, he was leading them straight towards the den. But I think it was just as likely, if not more likely, that they would have died faster had they just stayed in one spot.
Good point.
So it's a seesaw. But that scene where Otway puts him in his place at the campfire. He throws up some sparks, throws him to the ground, and says, "This is not the time for your macho bullcrap." Basically, in more intense language, of course, but that's what he says.
Movie's highly colorful.
Yeah, to put it mildly. But right after he does that is when the wolf appears, and Otway, despite throwing down Diaz to the ground and putting him in his place, protects him. Because that's his job as leader, is to protect these people. And he is proving himself as a man who is capable of being their leader and is capable of protecting them. And so Diaz, from this point onward, he apologizes. He says, I'm sorry. This I was too much. That was not the correct thing. That was not the proper thing for me to do in the situation, and I'm sorry. And so over the course of the film, they're building these relationships. They're becoming more closely intertwined. And he has his final scene where he's injured, he's hurt his ankle, and he is tired, and he is done. And so that's his journey from the start of the film. He's afraid of dying, and so he puts on a macho face and questions Otway. But at the end of the film, he has accepted death and is making peace with death and with his surroundings. And he goes on his own terms, which is that's a huge difference for Diaz from the start of the film to the finish.
Totally. I part of me is like, come on, Diaz, you could fight or like go with Heinrich's idea of like get a litter together or something. Just keep going, because I mean, I hear always what he said before about like keep fighting every moment. You just mom makes you fight for a little bit for the next one. I'm like, come on, Diaz, you can do it. Because by this time, I'm like, I'm a Diaz fan. I want you to survive this. But I think it is beautiful how he goes. That he does choose. Okay, this is where it's going to be, and he goes. It sounds like he is a little afraid there, right at the end, before it cuts away.
Mm-hmm.
But I love that he wasn't like trying to be a hindrance to the other to Otway and Heinrich.
Right. He wasn't being selfish. He realized that at this point he was more a burden than anything else, and that in this place of all places, with this beautiful view of the mountainside and the frozen water everywhere, frozen lake or river or whatever it is, it's a peaceful place, and he's happy to say, okay, this is where I can say goodbye. And again, it's non-selfish here, as opposed to being so selfish that he was wanting to take money and wallets and watches off of dead bodies at the start of the film.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's huge for him. It's huge. And he's making amends for his wrongs from before.
Totally.
Now, are there any other characters you wanted to talk about at all? Those are the main two as far as growth goes, but all the characters are great here.
Yeah, I just want to say I really loved the story that Talgut tells about his daughter running the hair on his head, and even though I think I knew what was happening when I saw that for the first time. When you see like he falls from this tree and you see his daughter over him, I feel like, I think I know what's happening. But just to have that beautiful image of a daughter just or someone close to you just being very loving and just very kind to you, to be totally contrasted with being ripped apart by wolves. There's just something beautifully horrific about that, and I can't quite put my finger on why that is so vivid to me. I think it's just that I probably because I hope if when I die, it can be at peace regardless of what's happening around me, that I can have peace during that time. So maybe that's what it is.
Well, I like its depiction of death being something that is warm and embracing, and you're welcomed by the people you love. Which is the last film we talked about on Cinescope was Les Miserables, and the same thing happens with Jean Valjean at the end of the film. He's welcomed by Fantine, who is this woman whose daughter he's been looking after for all these years due to a promise he made. So I like that notion of the people we love and the people who love us are the ones who take us on to the next plane of existence. Now, speaking of religious talk, we do have Henrik, and he is the stalwart Christian. He's the man who wants to say the prayer. He's the one who is trying to convince the others, like it's faith. It's just it's faith.
Does he say he's a Christian? I don't recall that.
I think Henrik does. It's the scene in the forest where they're all sharing their stories, and Diaz says, that fairy tale stuff. I'm an atheist, and Otway says, yeah, I'm an atheist too. Although I wish I could believe in something. And I think it's Henrik who's saying, well, I have faith. It's faith, guys. Come on.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Yes. And so I'm splitting hairs because I'm just trying to say, I remember him saying, yeah, it's about faith.
Okay. Yeah. He doesn't explicitly say Christian.
That.
Okay.
I'm keeping you on your toes, Chad, here at
right. Yeah. I got
midnight. Dark 30 your time.
But yeah, I mean, both of us are Christians. And so I identified with his character and trying to find peace, an exterior peace in their situation of hopelessness. And then you have Otway at the end of the film who calls out to God and says, hey, show me something, give me something to believe in, because if you don't, then I'm just going to go at this on my own. Now, I don't know if there's any discussion there to be had between you and me, but it.
Well, I'd be happy to discuss that. And you know what? I never really had an answer to that until I watched it this time to Otway's. I don't think it's fair to call it a tantrum because what he's gone through, it's warranted how he feels, just having lost everyone and then not getting anything except a blank sky, just a gray sky, and that's all you get always. Sorry. That calls deep into something of me as wanting to see. That calls deep into something of me of wanting to see God show up in my times of hardship. I mean, recently I had a daughter who was in the hospital, and I kept saying, "God, I know you can make her well. Why aren't you making her well? She could come home right now. Why aren't you doing this?" And that wasn't God's timing. It was very much always like, "I want it now, not later."
Right.
And but for my daughter, who's fine now, by the way, it was just later. And what I find fascinating, though, this time watching, I'm like, Otway, you boob, you've survived a plane crash. You've survived wolves. You survived committing suicide. You've been saved several times now. You've been given signs. You're just blind to them is really what it amounts to me. I mean, maybe that's a bit cold of me to say, but I think in retrospect, you can see, yeah, you've had life this whole time. Each breath you have is God showing up. I mean, that's my belief anyway. So,
well, I mean, even the very, very brief end credit scene, there's a potential he survived that wolf attack. So, I mean, I think that's a valid point. This is a man who's gone through traumatic event after traumatic event with his wife, and then with the plane crash, and with losing his entire party that he saw himself responsible for. And there's still the potential he lived through it all. So, in a way, you could see that as a curse, but I think that life is a gift, and maybe if he is still alive there at the end in that final shot, which, I mean, personally, I don't think we would have gotten a final shot if it was supposed to be implied that he was dead, but because I think we could have drawn our own conclusions otherwise. But
exactly, good point. Yes,
but I think that's important. Faith isn't something that you need proof of, as much as you may want it. Faith is faith. It's believing in something that isn't there. That's why Polar Express is one of my favorite movies, is because it drives this message home. Sometimes seeing is believing. Sometimes the most real things in lives are those things we can't see. And anyways, that's not one of the main themes of this movie, but it was just something I thought was worth talking about a little bit, considering our background.
Yes, thank you for mentioning it. I was going to call it out at some point, so thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Well, let's talk about music a little bit by Mark Streitenfeld. Do you have any thoughts on his score for this film?
One of my favorite scores. Oh my gosh. Really? I know it's like simple themes, and I'm not a music person. Chad, you could speak to this way better than I could. But I just love the simplicity of the piano and I think violin or some stringed instrument. And just I feel like there's 2 or 3 main motifs, maybe is the right word for it. Yeah. But the way they're used and how sometimes you're hearing it, and like when he's reading the letter and it's the da-na, da-na, and then all of a sudden, someone interrupts him and like the music's just cut off. I felt like that was a really I don't recall movies using music in that way to punctuate so much a character's internal thoughts being interrupted, and I thought that was really striking. I really liked it in that way. But the way they used the music to build up Otway's relationship with his father, how almost like it was both hopeful and sad, or it was sad, but there were good memories too. It had sort of touches of both in that. And then him being ready to live and fight on this day. I thought when the music amped up at the end there, it was just great. And so I love this soundtrack.
I'm glad you've got some experience with it, because my experience is watching the film today.
Okay.
Something that stood out to me in the opening sequence was there's a single sustained string that lasts like the first 5 minutes. It's just this ongoing single pitch that
Oh,
I
really?
don't know if
I don't know if I
it's
noticed
completely
that.
nonstop, but it's like a tension.
Oh, the other Liam Neeson movie.
Yeah. The other, it's all connected, but it's like it's a sort of tension or something. I'm not entirely sure what its purpose was, but it was present throughout the very beginning of the film, with the
Interesting.
more tender music signifying his wife, signifying his relationship to his father, the poem, his
Hmm.
suicide, all that kind of music playing underneath or on top of that
Hmm.
sustained note. So I thought that was really interesting.
Hmm.
And the whole score itself was this pleasant mix, like the film was, of horror, of action, and of drama. I think this, among the other Liam Neeson action movies I've seen, this one stands out as having a little bit more depth, because it's not
Oh,
just like
totally.
on a single location, find the bad guy, kill the bad guy, you win. Um,
Exactly.
so I like that this sort of bridges genres a little bit more than just let's mess some people up on a train. um, so
Totally.
I like the blend of music, and then
Hmm.
the final just particular moment I wanted to mention was in the den at the end of the film, as he is uh, looking through the wallets, and as we get the flashback that reveals his wife's illness. Uh, the piano is playing, and it is
Hmm.
beautiful piano. It is
Hmm.
so pleasant and so peaceful, as he is in possibly potentially the final moments of his life. So
Yeah,
that was just a standout moment for me.
totally. Love that part too. Yeah.
Well, moving on to our final section, relevance, takeaways. What's a theme that you take away from this movie?
Well, I've mentioned it several times here, but just that living almost it's kind of weird to say, but almost living for living's sake is worth living for. Let me try that, saying that a different way. Eh, Having life is precious and valuable, and it's worth you fighting for other people to have life. And I think it's so precious that you giving up your life to sacrifice yourself for others is, and this is something we actually talked about on my podcast recently when we discussed Disney's Hercules, is we have a movie and theology component to the podcast. And something we mentioned is what makes a hero. And so we talked about uh, does Hercules giving up or Hercules designed to give up his powers to save Meg, is that worth the destruction that Hades is going to cause on all of Greece? And like, do you value the one over the many, or what have you? And what makes a hero, etc. So something that we came to is sacrifice is something that really signifies a hero. And I think that I got lost in my thoughts, but I'll say, suffice it to say that life is really, really valuable. And I love that this movie punctuates that these men are even, let me say it this way. The title of the short story is Ghost Walkers because I think all these men are walking through life as ghosts. They're not really living. It's not until they come face to face with their mortality that they actually start living, because then they see, oh, this thing that I've been wasting doing nothing, actually, I don't have all the time in the world. I have to do something with it. So what am I going to do with it now? Now the chips are down. Now is where I have to decide how I'm going to actually live my life. So I think I'll leave it there for now.
I think that's a valuable point. I didn't write down sacrifice as a theme, but you're absolutely right. That's very prominent in this movie. Looking at Otway at the beginning, after the crash, when he sees the corpse that is being eaten by a wolf, he charges
Hmm.
at it rather
Yeah.
than let it sort of be.
Yeah.
because it's the decent thing to do. He does the same thing when a couple other characters are attacked by wolves. Instead of running, fend for yourself, let's escape while they're distracted. Let's go try and save our friend. Let's try and save his body at least. And so it's not even self-sacrifice to save another life. It's just self-sacrifice in the way of decency.
Yeah.
So I like that point. But then just the whole notion of facing fears, whether it's wolves or whether it's heights, as Hendrix talks. No, it's not Hendrix. Which
it's Talget.
Talget. Yeah, that's right. Talget's the one who is afraid of heights, and he faces it, and even just the over-encompassing fear of death. All these characters have to face what they're afraid of, and throughout the film, Otway is also quoting this poem that his dad wrote when he was a kid, that ends with "Live and die on this day," and I think that just means live your life in a way that you have no regrets about what you do going forward. Face your fears, take risks, do things outside of your comfort zone, not necessarily things that are going to get you in danger, but things that are going to give you a fulfilling life. Yeah. And I think that this film talks on that as well.
Yeah. And sort of circling back to just the sacrifice thing, I think as Christians, the whole idea of live and die on this day, that can have a very existential tone to it. But I think there's also a very Christian mindset to take that quote as that live and die to yourself this day, because really we want to die to ourselves and live more in Christ. So it's interesting how I love how movies that you bring yourself to it and take out of it as you will, but I love that you can that art allows us to examine and self-explore and explore, and I love movies like this because of stuff like that.
And sort of the last thing for me, I suppose, is I think it's fascinating that Otway is a character who wanted to have faith. And we already talked about this, but if you want to have faith, then just have faith. Put something out there. Say that you are uncertain about something, but just trust that there is something out there that is going to go right for you. There's not really much else to say beyond that because we already had this faith discussion, but I just thought it was something worth pointing out, that if you want faith, then have faith. It's not more complicated than that. It doesn't need to be more complicated than that. Just because you have faith doesn't mean you can't have doubts.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And a pastor of mine once phrased it that doubt is the sea that faith swims in or floats in or something like that, because you can't really just be doubtless. That's not possible.
Right.
There's always going to be doubt, and that's okay. God's big enough for your doubts.
Right. Well, any final thoughts about this film before we close off?
Oh man. Well, if you think that this is just, I mean, we've already mentioned this, but if you're still not sure, I don't know, is this just like they're just trying to survive, and so what? Okay, so you're saying one guy might make it. That doesn't sound very uplifting. Why would I watch this? Or, man, I want to see them like take out all the wolves. Or if you want this to be more of an action movie, then you're probably not going to get that. If you're actually looking for characters that you can connect with and want to be moved by and are actually affected by when they die or the actions they take, I would say you need to see this movie. I haven't had my wife hasn't seen it, so I don't know if I'd be curious if women are as affected by it as men. I would assume that it has more of a intrinsic impact on me as a man than it would for women, but maybe not. Maybe it impacts women just as much. So, but for me as a man, it definitely impacts me on a very deep level.
It has the same sort of lone survivor quality of this brotherhood of people who are just facing all the odds, and they're stacked against them, and not all of them make it out, but it's about the relationships with each other. So
Yeah.
well, with that, I think that is the end of the official 75th episode of Cinescope. Thank you so much, Francisco, for dealing with all the scheduling troubles and sickness and all the things we've been struggling with the past week and a half. But we've done it. We did it. We're back together.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Chad. It is awesome being on Cinescope once again.
Contact for the show, facebook.com/Cinescope podcast and @Cinescope pod on Twitter. Please consider going over to iTunes or the Apple Podcasts app on your iOS device to rate, review, and or subscribe. And if you have feedback or ideas, you can email the cinescopepodcast@gmail.com. And that includes if you're interested in co-hosting like Francisco did just now. Now, Francisco, where can people find you, your work, and your other content online?
You can find me personally at FXRUIZX on Twitter and Instagram. And you can also find my podcast, which is the main stuff I do, at retrorewindpodcast.com. We have about 100 we have 140 episodes now by the time this is out. And lots of movies and a handful of video games we've covered there. Something I've also started recently is live streaming. So if you're a fan of retro games or even want to watch us record the podcast live, check us out at twitch.tv/retrorewindpod.
Okay, and the best place to find me is at Chadadada on Twitter. That is CHADADADA. Also, facebook.com/Chad.Hopkins. Don't forget about my other podcast, An American Workplace, where we talk about NBC's The Office. And today, we just released our episode covering the season finale of season 3. And you can find that where podcasts can be found and on the website workplacepodcast.com. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there's the spinoff of this show called Cinescope Today, which is located in the same feed. Episode 2 should now be available, where we talk about The Commuter. So you get 2 Liam Neeson movie discussions in 1 week. You are welcome. And you can find that, like I said, in the same feed. And all the show notes and contact information can be found at the website, theCinescopePodcast.com. And that is all for this week. Thanks again, Francisco. It's been a blast.
Thank you, Chad.
And thank you, everyone, for listening to episode 75. I'm Chad Hopkins. This was Cinescope, and we'll be back next week with episode 76. Have fun and celebrate movies.